I remember the day my father died like it was yesterday, even though it's been 3 years since I stood in that hospital room watching the machines go silent. My name is Rebecca, and I was 32 years old when I learned that grief isn't the worst thing that can happen when you lose a parent. Sometimes, what comes after is even harder. Dad had always been distant. Not cold exactly, but there was this wall between us that I could never quite climb over. My older sisters, Amanda and Victoria, they seemed to have a secret language with him that I was never taught. They would laugh at his jokes before he finished the punchline. They knew which wine he preferred with dinner. They understood his silences. I was always on the outside looking in, pressing my face against the glass of their relationship, wondering what I had done wrong. Growing up in Sao Paulo, in our massive house in Jardins, I should have felt privileged. And I did, in a way. But privilege doesn't keep you warm at night when you're wondering why your own father barely looks at you during family dinners. Amanda was the eldest, perfect in every way that mattered to our father. She went to law school, just like him. She married a man from a good family. She said the right things at the right time. Victoria, the middle child, had his business sense. She could talk about investments and market trends by the time she was 16. She made him proud. And then there was me, the youngest. The one who wanted to be an artist. The one who dropped out of business school to pursue photography. The one who embarrassed him at dinner parties by talking about social causes instead of stock portfolios. The disappointment. When the lawyer called us in for the reading of the will, I wasn't expecting much. I had made peace with being the odd one out years ago, or at least I thought I had. We sat in that oak-paneled office downtown, the three of us in a row like we were waiting for judgment. The lawyer, Senor Cardoso, was an old friend of my father's. He kept looking at me with something I couldn't quite read in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or was it concern? Amanda sat perfectly straight in her chair, her designer handbag placed just so at her feet. She had flown in from New York for this, leaving her husband and 2 kids behind. Victoria was checking her phone every few minutes, probably monitoring her real estate deals even in the middle of our father's will reading. And I sat there in my thrift store dress, my camera bag at my feet, feeling like I was 12 years old again, waiting to be told I wasn't good enough. Senor Cardoso cleared his throat and began to read. To Amanda, my father left 50 million reais. I heard her sharp intake of breath, saw the way her hand flew to her mouth. 50 million. It was more than any of us had expected. Victoria got the same. 50 million reais. They looked at each other, and I saw something pass between them. Relief, validation. Proof that they had been the good daughters. The ones who deserved their father's love translated into cold, hard cash. Then came my part. Senor Cardoso paused, and that look in his eyes intensified. He said my father had left me a chest, an old wooden chest that had been in storage for decades. That was it. No money, no property. Just a locked chest that I would need to pick up from a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. The silence in that room was deafening. Amanda and Victoria didn't even try to hide their shock. Or maybe it was satisfaction. I couldn't tell anymore. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out before anyone could see the tears that were threatening to spill over. I had known I was different, but I never realized just how much my father must have resented me until that moment. I didn't talk to my sisters for 2 weeks after that. They tried calling, but I couldn't bear to hear their voices. Whether they were trying to gloat or offer pity, I didn't want either, didn't. I threw myself into my work, taking photographs of the city at odd hours, trying to capture the loneliness I felt in the faces of strangers. But at night, alone in my small apartment in Vila Madalena, I couldn't stop thinking about that chest. What could possibly be in there that my father thought was a suitable inheritance? Old clothes? Broken toys from my childhood? Some final insult to remind me that I had never been good enough? Those 2 weeks were some of the darkest of my life. I would wake up at 3 a.m, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. I replayed every interaction I'd ever had with my father, searching for clues about why he had treated me so differently. I remembered being 7 years old, showing him a drawing I'd made at school. He had glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before returning to his newspaper. Amanda's straight-A report card got framed and hung in his study. My drawings went into a folder that eventually disappeared into some closet, forgotten. I remembered being 15, begging him to let me take an art class instead of another business elective. He had looked at me with such disappointment, asking me when I was going to stop wasting time on hobbies and start thinking about my future. Victoria had just landed an internship at a real estate firm, and he talked about it for weeks. My artwork never made it into his conversations with friends and colleagues. During those 2 weeks, I barely ate. I survived on coffee and the occasional sandwich from the cafe downstairs. My best friend Lucia came by one evening, concerned because I hadn't returned any of her messages. She found me sitting on my floor surrounded by old photo albums, tears streaming down my face. "Rebecca, what's going on?" she asked, sitting down beside me. I told her everything. About the will, about the chest, about feeling like my father's final act had been to confirm what I'd always suspected, that I wasn't worthy of his love. Lucia listened quietly, then said something that stuck with me. "You know what I think? I think your father was afraid of you." "Afraid of me?" I laughed bitterly. "Why would he be afraid of me?" "Because you're the only one who didn't need his approval to know who you are," she said. "Amanda and Victoria, they built their entire lives around making him proud. But you walked away from everything he wanted for you and did it anyway. That takes a kind of strength that probably terrified him." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard to see strength when I felt so broken. Still, her words planted a seed. Maybe there was another way to look at this. Maybe the chest wasn't an insult. Maybe it was something else entirely. Finally, curiosity won over pride. I drove out to the storage facility on a Saturday morning, the address Senor Cardoso had given me clutched in my hand. The place was in a run-down part of town, surrounded by warehouses and abandoned lots. Not exactly where I expected my father to store anything of value. The owner, an elderly man named Jorge, seemed to be expecting me. He led me through rows of identical storage units until we reached one at the very back. As we walked, I noticed how he kept glancing at me, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he spoke. "Your father came here often," he said. "Once a month like clockwork for many years." I stopped walking. "What?" "He would sit in there," so Jorge gestured toward the unit we were approaching, "for hours sometimes, just sitting with that chest. I asked him once what was inside, and he said it was his greatest treasure and his deepest regret." My heart was pounding now. This didn't sound like the indifferent father I thought I knew. This sounded like something else entirely. Something more complex and painful than simple rejection. When he unlocked the door and pulled it open, I saw it immediately. The chest sat alone in the middle of the empty unit, covered in a layer of dust that suggested it had been there for a very long time. It was made of dark wood, intricately carved with patterns I didn't recognize. There was a heavy iron lock holding it closed. So Jorge handed me a key, old and tarnished, and left me alone with my inheritance. I knelt down in front of the chest, my hands shaking as I brushed away the dust. The wood was beautiful underneath, clearly crafted by someone who knew their trade. I put the key in the lock and turned it. The mechanism resisted at first, decades of disuse making it stiff, but finally it gave way with a click that echoed in the empty space. I lifted the lid slowly, not sure what I would find inside. The first thing I saw was letters, hundreds of them, tied together with faded ribbons. My heart started pounding as I picked up the first bundle. They were addressed to my father, but the return address made my breath catch. They were from my mother who had died when I was only 3 years old. My mother, who I barely remembered, who existed for me only in a handful of photographs and the few stories my father would tell when he had drunk enough wine to soften his edges. I sat down right there on the concrete floor of the storage unit and began to read. The first letter was dated 35 years ago, before I was born, when my parents were still young and in love. My mother wrote about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future. She wrote about Amanda and Victoria as babies, about the joy they brought her. And then, as I kept reading, moving through the bundles chronologically, I found letters from after I was born. She wrote about me, about how I was different from my sisters, how I would stare at colors and lights for hours, how I seemed to see the world in a way that was uniquely my own. She wrote about her fears that my father didn't understand me, that he was disappointed I wasn't like Amanda and Victoria. And then, in a letter dated just 2 months before she died, she wrote something that made me start crying right there on that dirty floor. She wrote about being sick. She had been diagnosed with cancer, but she and my father had decided to keep it quiet, to protect us girls. She wrote about her fears for me, specifically. She worried that after she was gone, my father wouldn't know how to love me, wouldn't know how to appreciate the artistic soul that I had inherited from her. She wrote that she had asked my father to save these letters for me, along with something else, something she had been working on in secret. I dug deeper into the chest, my hands moving frantically now. Beneath the letters, I found notebooks, dozens of them, filled with my mother's handwriting. They were journals, but not just any journals. They were filled with sketches, with observations about light and shadow, with notes about composition and perspective. My mother had been an artist too, something I had never known, something my father had never told me. The notebooks were organized by date, spanning from before she married my father until just weeks before her death. I picked up one from early in their relationship and started reading. Her voice came through so clearly on those pages, full of passion and hope and dreams. She wrote about her photography, about exhibitions she wanted to have, about a career she was building. She wrote about falling in love with my father, about how charming he was, how stable, how he made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before. But then, as I moved through the journals chronologically, I watched her dream begin to shrink. She wrote about meeting his family, about their barely concealed disdain for her artistic pursuits. She wrote about his mother suggesting that serious wives didn't waste time on hobbies. She wrote about her first exhibition being scheduled on the same night as an important family dinner and how my father had asked her to cancel it. She did. She wrote about how it felt to put her camera away, to tell her gallery contacts that she needed to step back, to watch her dream dissolve like sugar in water. She wrote about Amanda's birth, about how becoming a mother filled some of the emptiness left by abandoning her art, but it didn't fill all of it. She wrote about stolen moments when she would take out her camera while the baby napped, about the guilt she felt for wanting something beyond motherhood. When Victoria was born, the entries became shorter, more sporadic. The demands of 2 children and the expectations of being a proper wife left little room for anything else. Then came the entries about me. I read them through tears, watching my mother's handwriting become more urgent, more desperate. She wrote about seeing me, really seeing me, from the moment I was born. She wrote that I looked at the world differently, that even as an infant, I would become transfixed by patterns of light on the wall, by the way shadows moved across the ceiling. As I grew, she documented every sign that I had inherited her artistic eye, the way I arranged my toys by color, the way I would spend hours watching the sunset, the way I cried when she tried to take me away from a street performer painting portraits in the square. She wrote about the day I first picked up a camera. I was 5 years old, and I had found one of her old ones in a closet. She had hidden them there, unable to throw them away, but unable to look at them without feeling the weight of her abandoned dreams. I brought it to her and asked her to show me how it worked. She wrote that it was one of the happiest and most heartbreaking moments of her life. Happy because she saw herself in me, saw that the artist she had been was not completely lost. Heartbreaking because she knew what it had cost her, and she feared the same fate for me. The entries from her final year were the hardest to read. She knew she was dying, and she was terrified about what would happen to me after she was gone. She wrote about conversations with my father, begging him to understand me, to nurture my artistic nature instead of crushing it the way his family had crushed hers. She wrote about his confusion, his inability to understand why she was so worried about this one thing when there were so many practical matters to discuss. She wrote about making him promise to give me these journals, these letters, this camera when I was old enough to understand. She wrote, "My greatest regret is not fighting harder for my dreams. My greatest fear is that Rebecca will fight, and the world will break her the way it broke me. My greatest hope is that she will be stronger than I was, that she will hold on to herself no matter what anyone says or thinks or expects. I'm leaving her these journals so she will know that I understand, so she will know that choosing art is not choosing selfishness. It's choosing truth. It's choosing to honor the gift of seeing, the blessing and curse of being unable to look away from beauty." At the very bottom of the chest, wrapped carefully in cloth, I found a camera. An old film camera, professional grade even by today's standards, that must have cost a fortune back then. There was a note attached to it in my mother's handwriting. It said, "For my Rebecca, who sees the world the way I do, may you capture all the beauty I will miss. May you be brave enough to choose the life I couldn't have. May you never apologize for seeing what others overlook." I held that camera and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I cried for my mother, for the dreams she had sacrificed. I cried for my father, who had loved a woman he never fully understood. I cried for myself, for all the years I spent thinking I was a disappointment when really I was a continuation. I was my mother's second chance, her legacy, her hope that the artistic soul she carried could live on in a world that made space for it. I sat in that storage unit for 3 hours, reading letter after letter, journal after journal. I learned that my mother had given up her photography career when she married my father. His family was traditional, wealthy, conservative. They didn't approve of her artistic pursuits, so she had put away her camera and focused on being the wife they expected her to be. But she had never stopped seeing the world through an artist's eyes. And when I was born, when she saw that same spark in me, It had filled her with both joy and terror. She was joyful because she saw herself in me, saw that her artistic soul would live on. But she was terrified because she knew what it had cost her to suppress that part of herself. She knew that my father, despite loving her, had never truly understood that part of her, and she feared that after she was gone, he would try to mold me into someone I wasn't, the way his family had tried to do to her. I found one letter that she'd never sent to my father, written just weeks before her death. In it, she poured out everything she'd never been able to say. She wrote about the night they met, at a gallery where her photographs were being shown. He had stood in front of one of her photographs for 15 minutes, really looking at it. When he spoke to her, he told her the photograph made him remember things he thought he'd forgotten. She fell in love with him then, she wrote, because he saw what she was trying to do. But somewhere along the way, she wrote, you stopped seeing. Or maybe I stopped showing you. I watched myself disappear piece by piece, and I let it happen because I thought that's what love required. I was wrong. I should have fought harder. She wrote about watching me grow, about recognizing herself in every creative impulse I had. The letter continued, her handwriting becoming less steady. I'm leaving her my camera, my journals, my letters. I'm leaving her proof that she comes from someone who understood her. But you, my love, have to give her something too. You have to tell her that choosing art over money doesn't make her foolish. It makes her brave. Promise me you'll tell her. Reading those words, I understood finally why my father had struggled so much with me. He had promised a dying woman something he didn't know how to give. So he preserved her words, her dreams, her camera, and waited until I was strong enough to receive them. I found another bundle of letters, these addressed to me directly, written during my mother's final months. She knew she wouldn't be there to guide me through life, so she tried to leave me guidance in writing. There were letters for different milestones: my 10th birthday, my 16th, my 21st. Letters about heartbreak and resilience, about choosing a career, about staying true to yourself when the world wants you to be someone else. Reading these letters was like having my mother back, like hearing her voice after decades of silence. I could hear her in every word, could imagine her writing them late at night when the house was quiet, knowing she was running out of time, desperate to leave me everything she wouldn't be alive to say. Reading those journals, I finally understood my father's distance. It wasn't that he didn't love me. It was that every time he looked at me, he saw her. He saw the woman he had loved and lost, the woman whose artistic dreams he had never fully appreciated until it was too late. I reminded him of his greatest regret, not that he had lost her to cancer, but that he had never truly known her while she was alive. There was one more thing at the bottom of the chest, a sealed envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting. The paper was newer than everything else, dated just 6 months before he died. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside was a letter from him. It was short, not like my mother's flowing prose. That wasn't his style, but every word hit me like a punch to the gut. He wrote that he had been a coward. He had kept my mother's letters and journals and camera locked away because looking at them hurt too much. He wrote that every time he saw me pick up a camera, every time I talked about art and beauty and capturing moments, he saw his failure as a husband reflected back at him. He had pushed me away not because I disappointed him, but because I reminded him of how he had disappointed the woman he loved. He wrote that he had given Amanda and Victoria money because that was all he knew how to give. But to me, he was giving what mattered most: the truth about my mother, the truth about myself. The validation that the path I had chosen was not wrong, but was actually the fulfillment of a dream that had been passed down to me through blood and love. He ended the letter by saying he was sorry. Sorry for the distance. Sorry for the walls. Sorry for making me feel like I wasn't enough when the truth was that I was too much. I was too much of a reminder of what he had lost, of what he had failed to cherish when he had the chance. I sat in that storage unit until So Jorge came to check on me, worried because I had been there so long. I must have looked like a mess, my eyes red and swollen, surrounded by letters and journals and the camera that was now the most precious thing I owned. He helped me pack everything carefully back into the chest. I arranged for him to deliver it to my apartment. I couldn't carry it alone, and I didn't want to leave any of it behind. That night, I finally called my sisters. First Amanda, then Victoria. I told them what I had found. I read them some of the letters about them as babies, about how much our mother had loved all 3 of us. I heard Amanda start crying, really crying, maybe for the first time since the funeral. Victoria got quiet, which was her way of processing emotion. Then I told them what I realized sitting in that storage unit, that Dad hadn't loved them more. He had just loved them differently. in the only way he knew how. He gave them money because that was the language he spoke, the language of his family, of his business. But to me, he had given something that required courage. He had given me the truth, even though it exposed his own failures. Amanda was silent for a long time after I finished. Then she said something that surprised me. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said years ago." I waited, my heart pounding. "I've always envied you," she said, her voice breaking. "I know that sounds insane, given everything, but it's true. You had the courage to be yourself, to choose your own path even when Dad clearly disapproved. I spent my whole life trying to be perfect, trying to be what everyone expected, and I'm not sure I even know who I really am anymore." She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. "I married Richard because he came from the right family and had the right job and said all the right things. I went to law school because Dad went to law school. I had kids at the exact right time according to some invisible schedule I didn't even realize I was following. And you know what? I'm miserable. I look at my life from the outside and it looks perfect, but from the inside it feels like I'm living someone else's dream." "Amanda, I had no idea," I said, stunned. "How could you?" She laughed bitterly. "I've been performing this role for so long I almost believe it myself. But when I saw you at the will reading, when I saw your face after hearing about the chest, I felt terrible. Not just because you seemed hurt, but because part of me was relieved. Relieved that I got the money and you didn't. And then I felt disgusted with myself for feeling that way." Victoria joined in then, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I think we all felt disgusted with ourselves that day. I know I did. Rebecca, do you remember when we were kids and you told Dad you wanted to be a photographer?" "Which time?" I asked. "I told him that about 100 times. "The first time," Victoria said. "You were maybe 8 years old. We were at dinner and you announced it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And Dad, he just kind of froze. He didn't say anything for a long time, and then he changed the subject. I saw his face, though. He looked terrified. Not angry, not disappointed. Terrified." "I don't remember that," I said slowly. "I do," Victoria continued. "Because later that night I was walking past his study, and I heard him on the phone with Aunt Claudia. He was talking about Mom, about how she used to say the same thing, about how being a photographer was going to be her life. And Aunt Claudia, she was saying something about how Mom had to give all that up, and Dad said, I know what I took from her, and I see it every time I look at Rebecca." The silence on the line was heavy with the weight of this revelation. My father had known. All along, he had known what my mother had sacrificed. And instead of encouraging me, instead of making sure I didn't make the same sacrifice, he had pushed me away because looking at me hurt too much. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" I asked Victoria, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was a kid," she said. "I didn't understand what it meant. And then later, when I was older and started to piece it together, I didn't know how to bring it up. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, or misunderstood. But after today, after the will reading, I keep thinking about it. Dad didn't give you less, Rebecca. He gave you the thing he couldn't face himself. We talked for hours that night, the three of us, really talked in a way we hadn't since we were children. Amanda told us about her marriage, about how she and Richard barely spoke anymore except about logistics and schedules. She told us about waking up every morning and having to remind herself who she was supposed to be that day. She told us about seeing a therapist secretly because she couldn't admit to anyone that her perfect life was making her miserable. Victoria shared her own struggles. The constant pressure to make every deal, to climb every ladder, to prove herself in an industry dominated by men who underestimated her. She talked about her husband Marco, who was a good man, but who had married the version of her that she performed for the world, not the woman she was underneath. She talked about looking at me over the years and wondering what it would feel like to choose passion over practicality, to risk everything for something you believed in. "I used to get so frustrated with you," Victoria admitted. "Every time you made a choice that didn't make financial sense, every time you turned down some opportunity because it didn't feel authentic, I would think you were being naive. But you weren't naive. You were being true to yourself, and that's something I've never been brave enough to do." I told them about my own struggles. About the nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I should have just followed the path that was laid out for me. I told them about the gnawing insecurity that maybe Dad was right, maybe I was wasting my life on something impractical and foolish. I told them about the times I almost gave up, almost went back to business school, almost tried to become the daughter I thought he wanted. "But you didn't give up," Amanda said. "That's what I admire about you. You held on to yourself even when it hurt, even when it would have been easier to let go. We made plans to meet for lunch the next week, just the three of us, without husbands or lawyers, or the weight of our father's expectations hanging over us. We agreed to start reading our mother's letters together, to learn about the woman we had all lost too young. Amanda suggested we make it a weekly thing, a time for just us to reconnect and figure out who we were to each other outside of our childhood roles. Before we hung up, Victoria said something that made me smile. You know what's funny? Dad left us all exactly what we needed. Amanda and I needed the security of money so we could eventually take risks. We needed to know we had a safety net before we could admit our lives weren't working. And you needed to know the truth. You needed to know that Mom saw you and that Dad saw you too, even if it was too painful for him to show it. Over the next few months, my relationship with my sisters transformed. We met regularly, not just for obligatory family dinners, but for real conversations. Amanda started taking painting classes, something she had wanted to do in college but had dismissed as impractical. Victoria began volunteering at an art gallery, discovering that she loved working with artists, helping them navigate the business side of their careers. The first time I visited Amanda in her painting class, I almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing jeans splattered with paint, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, completely focused on the canvas in front of her. She looked younger somehow, lighter. When she saw me, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. "It's terrible," she said, gesturing at her painting. "I have no idea what I'm doing, but Rebecca, I don't care. For the first time in maybe my whole life, I'm doing something just because I want to, not because I'm supposed to be good at it or because someone expects it from me." The painting was of a window, light streaming through onto an empty chair. It was simple, a bit clumsy in execution, but there was something honest about it that made my throat tight. "I think it's beautiful," I told her. She looked at me skeptically. "You're just being nice." "I'm not," I said. "I mean, technically you've got some things to work on, but that's not the point. The point is, I can see you in this. I can see what you were feeling when you painted it. That's what makes art real." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I painted it the morning after I told Richard I wanted a divorce. I woke up in the guest room where I've been sleeping for the past 6 months, and the sun was coming through the window, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like I could finally breathe. I wanted to capture that feeling. We hugged for a long time, my perfect older sister who was falling apart and putting herself back together in all the right ways. She told me about the conversations with Richard, about how he'd been surprised, but, in a way, relieved too. They'd been performing their marriage for years, both trying to be what the other needed while slowly losing themselves in the process. The divorce would be amicable, sad, but necessary. Victoria's transformation was different, but equally profound. She didn't leave her husband or quit her job, but something fundamental shifted in how she approached both. She started bringing Marco to the gallery where she volunteered, showing him a side of herself she'd always kept hidden. She told me about the first time she shared with him that she'd always wanted to work with art, not just with property. "He looked at me like I was a stranger," she said. And then he said, "I've been married to you for 8 years and I'm just learning this now." And I realized I'd never told him because I thought he'd married me for being practical and driven and successful. I thought if he knew I had these other dreams, these impractical interests, he'd be disappointed. "What did he say?" I asked. He said he wished I'd told him sooner. He said he'd spent our whole marriage trying to be the man he thought I wanted, and maybe we'd both been performing for each other instead of actually being with each other. She smiled. "We're in couples therapy now, trying to figure out who we actually are together. It's hard, but it's real. That's more than we had before." "And me?" I started a project photographing mothers and daughters, trying to capture the invisible threads that connect us across generations. I used my mother's camera for some of the shots, loading it with film and developing the photos in a dark room I rented. There was something magical about using her tools, about seeing the world through the same lens she had once looked through. My first subject was a woman named Patricia and her daughter Sophia. Patricia was a lawyer, like Amanda, and Sophia was 10 years old with dreams of being a dancer. I photographed them in the studio where Sophia took classes, capturing the moment when Patricia watched her daughter dance. The look on Patricia's face was so familiar to me now, having read my mother's journals. It was pride mixed with fear, joy mixed with protective worry. It was the look of a mother who saw her child choosing a path that wouldn't be easy, and who desperately wanted to make it easier without crushing the dream itself. After the shoot, Patricia asked me why I was doing this project. I told her about my mother, about the chest, about discovering that the artist I thought I'd become on my own had actually been carrying my mother's dream forward all along. My mother gave up her art, Patricia said quietly. She wanted to be a painter, but my grandfather told her it was foolish, that she needed to focus on finding a good husband. She did everything he said. And then she spent her whole life watching her sisters pursue careers, watching the world change, realizing that the sacrifice she'd made hadn't even been necessary. When I told her I wanted to be a lawyer, she cried. She said she was proud of me for choosing a life that was mine. We talked for over an hour, and by the end, both of us were in tears. This project was becoming bigger than I'd imagined. It wasn't just about mothers and daughters. It was about the dreams women pass down, the sacrifices they make, the ways they try to give their daughters the chances they never had. My second subject was Maria, a chef who owned a small restaurant in Bella Vista, and her daughter Camilla, who was studying engineering. Maria told me that her own mother had been a fantastic cook, but had never been allowed to work outside the home. Everything Maria's grandmother knew about food, about creating flavors and combining ingredients, had been confined to her own kitchen, shared only with family. When I told my mother I wanted to open a restaurant, she was terrified, Maria said. Not because she didn't think I could do it, but because she knew how hard it would be. She knew what it meant to be a woman in a professional kitchen, to fight for respect every single day. But she also understood that I had to try, that I had to take her knowledge and her passion and bring it out into the world. I photographed Maria and Camilla in the restaurant kitchen, Maria teaching her daughter how to make her grandmother's signature dish. The photograph captured 3 generations in one frame, Camilla's young hands learning the techniques, Maria's experienced hands guiding her, and in the background, a framed photograph of Maria's mother, watching over them both. Another subject, Elena, was a doctor, and her daughter Isabella was only 5 years old. Elena told me that her grandmother had been a curandera, a traditional healer in a small town in the interior. People came from miles around for her grandmother's remedies and advice, but she wasn't allowed to study medicine formally, wasn't recognized by official institutions, couldn't practice outside her community. My mother became a nurse, Elena explained, which was as close as she could get to following in her mother's footsteps within the system. And I became a doctor. 3 generations, each one getting a little closer to the dream that started with my grandmother mixing herbs in her kitchen. I photographed Elena in her white coat, holding Isabella, who was wearing a toy stethoscope and a serious expression. The image became one of the most powerful in the series, this tiny girl carrying forward a legacy that began with hands that were never allowed to hold a medical degree. Each photo session became a therapy of sorts, not just for the women I photographed, but for me too. I heard my mother's story reflected in theirs. The dreams deferred, the compromises made, the hope that the next generation would have it easier. I started asking each mother to write a letter to her daughter, something for me to include with the photograph. These letters were heartbreaking and beautiful in their honesty. Patricia wrote to Sophia, "I chose law because it was safe and respected and would make my family proud. But I watch you dance and I see freedom. I see someone who knows what brings her joy and isn't afraid to chase it. Don't ever lose that. Don't ever let someone convince you that practical matters more than passionate." Maria wrote to Camilla, "You don't want to be a chef like me, and that's perfect. You want to build things, to solve problems with math and science, to create in a completely different way than I do. That's how it should be. Each generation doesn't have to repeat the last one. We just have to be brave enough to choose authentically." Elena wrote to Isabella, "You're too young to read this now, but someday you'll understand. Your great-grandmother healed people with plants and prayers. Your grandmother healed people with compassion and knowledge. I heal people with medicine and technology. You'll heal people in ways we can't even imagine yet. That's the gift we pass down. Not a specific path, but the courage to heal, to help, to make the world better, in whatever way calls to us." The project took me a year to complete. I photographed 30 mother-daughter pairs, each one adding another layer to my understanding of inheritance, of legacy, of the invisible threads that connect us across time. Some of the daughters were following in their mother's footsteps. Others were deliberately choosing different paths. But all of them were carrying forward something essential: the belief that they had the right to choose, the courage to dream, the strength to become themselves. When I finally had all the photographs developed and printed, I spread them out on the floor of my apartment. 30 pairs of women, 60 individual stories, countless generations of dreams and sacrifices and hopes captured in a single moment. I sat in the middle of them and cried, overwhelmed by the beauty and pain of it all, by the realization that my mother's story was everyone's story, that every woman I'd photographed was both unique and universal. The project got attention. A local gallery wanted to show it. Then a magazine wanted to feature it. The money I made wasn't anywhere close to the millions my sisters had inherited, but it was mine, earned through my own work, my own vision, and it meant more to me than any amount of money could have. But the real inheritance wasn't the camera or the letters or even the vindication that my chosen path was valid. It was the understanding that came with them. Understanding of my father, of my mother, of myself. I learned that love isn't always expressed in the ways we expect or want. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence and distance. Sometimes it comes locked in a chest, waiting for the right moment to be opened. I also learned that the gifts we receive aren't always the ones we think we want. My sisters got 50 million Reais each. I got a dusty old chest. But that chest gave me back my mother. It gave me back my father, or at least the truth about him. It gave me back myself, the parts of me I had been questioning and doubting all those years. The response to my photography series was overwhelming. People wrote to me sharing their own stories about inherited dreams, about mothers and grandmothers who had sacrificed their ambitions, about the weight and gift of carrying someone else's unlived life forward. One woman told me about her grandmother who had wanted to be a doctor but wasn't allowed to attend medical school because she was a woman. She became a nurse instead, and pushed her daughter to become a doctor, which she did. The woman who wrote to me was now in medical school herself, the third generation carrying forward a dream that had started almost a century ago. A gallery owner named Beatriz reached out to me about doing a solo exhibition. Not just the Mothers and Daughters series, but something more comprehensive. Something that told the whole story of the chest, of my mother, of the inheritance that looked like nothing but turned out to be everything. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. One afternoon, about 8 months after opening the chest, I was in my apartment organizing some of my mother's journals when I found a loose page tucked into the back of one of them. It was a list she had made, titled, "Things I Hope My Daughters Know." I read through it slowly, savoring each line. She hoped we would know that we were loved, even when love looked different than we expected. She hoped we would know that our value wasn't in what we accomplished or how well we conformed, but in who we authentically were. She hoped we would know that the hardest path is often the one most worth walking. At the bottom of the page, there was a note specifically for me. She wrote, "To my youngest daughter, I hope you never lose your way of seeing. The world needs people who notice the light falling across a stranger's face, who capture the moments everyone else walks past. Don't let anyone convince you that beauty is impractical. Beauty is what makes life worth living." I framed that page and hung it in my studio. On days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I should have taken the safer path, I would read those words and remember. Remember that I was living the dream my mother had to abandon. Remember that my father's final gift to me was permission to be exactly who I was meant to be. My sisters and I eventually decided to do something with their inheritances that would have made both our parents proud. We created a foundation to support young artists from low-income backgrounds, giving them the resources and support to pursue their dreams. Amanda handled the legal structure. Victoria managed the finances. And I curated the programs, selecting recipients, mentoring young photographers and painters and sculptors who just needed someone to believe in them. The conversation that led to the foundation happened on one of our weekly sister dinners. We were at a small restaurant in Pinheiros, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about our mother's journals. Amanda had been reading the entries about our mother's early career, about the galleries that had shown interest in her work, about the opportunities she'd had to turn down after getting married. "It's so unfair," Amanda said, her voice tight with anger. "She had real talent. She could have had a real career. And she gave it all up because that's what was expected of her." "Women still give up their dreams," I said quietly. "Maybe not always for marriage, but for 100 other reasons. Because they can't afford art school. Because their families need them to get practical jobs. Because nobody ever told them that their creative vision matters." Victoria set down her wine glass, her business mind clearly working. "What if we change that? What if we use the money Dad left us to make sure other young women don't have to make the choice Mom made?" That's how it started. The three of us, sitting in a restaurant, getting increasingly excited about the possibility of turning our inheritance into something that would honor both our parents. The money Dad left Amanda and Victoria could support young artists. The truth Dad left me could guide how we did it, making sure we understood what these artists needed not just financially, but emotionally and creatively. We named it after our mother, Helena's legacy. The first year, we supported 20 artists. The application process was simple. Tell us about your art, tell us about your dreams, Tell us about the obstacles in your way. We didn't want perfect essays or impressive resumes. We wanted honesty. We wanted to find the young women who had fire in their bellies and creativity in their souls, but lacked the resources to pursue either. Our first recipient was a 19-year-old painter named Gabriela from a favela in the North Zone. She'd been painting on whatever surfaces she could find since she was a kid. Using paint, she mixed herself from whatever materials she could scavenge or afford. Her application included photos of murals she'd painted on the walls of her community, vibrant, bold works that showed real talent. She wrote that she'd been accepted to art school but couldn't afford to go, and that her family needed her to work instead. When we told her she'd been selected, that we would pay for her education and provide a monthly stipend for living expenses and art supplies, she started crying. Not quiet tears, but huge, gasping sobs that she couldn't control. When she finally could speak, she said, "I thought I was going to die without ever becoming who I was supposed to be." I understood exactly what she meant. That chest my father left me had given me the same gift we were now giving Gabriela. Permission. Permission to be who we were, to chase what called to us, to believe that our dreams mattered. By the third year, we had expanded to support over 100 artists. Some of them have gone on to show their work in galleries around the world. Others are still finding their voices, still learning their craft, but all of them are getting the chance to try, to create, to see what happens when they choose the impractical path of beauty. We held an annual event where our artists could show their work, where they could meet each other and form connections and collaborations. The second year's event was particularly meaningful. Gabriela, who was now in her second year of art school, had created a series of paintings about inheritance. Not financial inheritance, but the inheritance of dreams, of trauma, of resilience. One painting showed a young girl receiving a paintbrush from a ghostly figure of an older woman. The description read, "For all the women who couldn't paint their own lives, but left us the colors to paint ours." I stood in front of that painting with tears streaming down my face. Amanda came and stood beside me, putting her arm around my waist. "Mom would have loved this," she said softly. "Dad would have too," I replied. I think he would have finally understood what Mom was trying to tell him all those years. The foundation became our way of processing our parents' legacy, of taking the complicated mess of love and regret and misunderstanding that they left us and turning it into something beautiful. Amanda threw herself into it with the same dedication she'd once given to her law career, but this time she was fighting for something she believed in, rather than trying to prove herself worthy. Victoria used her business skills to make sure every real spent went directly to supporting artists, creating financial literacy programs to help them learn how to sustain their careers long-term. And I got to do what I loved most: see talent, nurture it, watch it bloom. I held monthly workshops where our artists could learn from each other, share techniques, talk about the challenges of being a creative person in a world that doesn't always value creativity. I became a mentor to dozens of young women, and in teaching them, I taught myself. I learned that I knew more than I thought I did. I learned that the struggles I'd faced had given me wisdom worth sharing. I learned that my journey, painful as it had been, could light the way for someone else. I still use my mother's camera sometimes, though I'm always careful with it, treating it like the treasure it is. I've built my career on digital photography now, but there's something special about loading film, about the anticipation of waiting to see how the images turned out, about the tangible click and whir of the mechanical shutter. It connects me to her in a way that feels almost spiritual, though I know it's really just memory and love and the power of objects to carry meaning. My relationship with my sisters continues to deepen. We've learned to see each other not as competitors for our father's affection, but as allies, as women trying to figure out how to honor where we came from while becoming who we're meant to be. Amanda left her husband last year. It was hard, but she said she couldn't keep pretending to be happy in a life that didn't fit her anymore. She moved back to São Paulo and bought a small apartment in Santa Cecilia, where she paints every morning before going to her job at the foundation. I was with her the day she told Richard. We'd spent the morning at my apartment, going through more of Mom's journals, and Amanda had been particularly quiet. Finally, she looked up at me and said, "I need to do it today. If I don't do it today, I'll talk myself out of it again." We drove to her house in New York together. I waited in a cafe down the street while she had the conversation. When she texted me 2 hours later, all she said was, "It's done. Come get me." I found her sitting on the front steps of the townhouse she'd shared with Richard for 8 years, her eyes red but her expression calm. She got in the car and we drove in silence for a while before she started talking. "He cried," she said. "I've never seen Richard cry. He said he'd known something was wrong for years, but he didn't know how to fix it. He asked me if there was someone else, and I told him yes. Me. There was me. A version of me I'd never let him meet because I was too busy being the woman I thought he'd married. She looked out the window at the city passing by. He asked me what he should tell people, and I said, tell them the truth. Tell them we were two people who got married for the wrong reasons and stayed married out of habit and fear. Tell them we loved each other, but not well enough to be honest. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. During that time, Amanda lived with me in São Paulo, sleeping on my couch and painting in my tiny living room. She painted furiously, working through her emotions on canvas. The paintings from that period are raw and chaotic, full of dark colors and sharp lines. But slowly, as the divorce progressed and she started to settle into her new life, the paintings changed. Light started appearing, softer colors, images of windows and doorways, of thresholds between one space and another. Her kids, Emma and Thomas, were 14 and 12 when she left. They were angry at first, especially Emma, who didn't understand why her mother would destroy their perfect family. Amanda told me about the phone call where Emma screamed at her, calling her selfish, saying she'd ruined everything. And you know what the worst part was? Amanda said, tears streaming down her face. She was saying all the things I've said to myself 100 times. Selfish, irresponsible, putting my own wants ahead of my family. But then I realized, what am I teaching my daughter if I show her that women should stay in situations that make them miserable? What am I teaching her about her own worth? It took time, but Emma eventually came around. The turning point was when she visited São Paulo and saw her mother's apartment, saw the paintings, saw the life Amanda was building for herself. Emma was quiet for a long time, then said, "You seem different, Mom. Happier." Amanda showed her daughter her studio space, the paintings she'd been working on. Emma stopped in front of one, a portrait of a woman shedding a heavy coat, underneath wearing something light and colorful. "Is this you?" Emma asked. "It's how I feel," Amanda replied. "Like I was wearing something heavy for so long I forgot I was wearing it, and taking it off hurt, but now I can breathe." Emma started crying then, and Amanda held her, and they talked for hours. Really talked, the way Amanda and I had been learning to talk. Emma admitted that she'd been scared that her mother leaving meant Amanda didn't love her. Amanda explained that leaving Richard had nothing to do with loving her children, and everything to do with learning to love herself enough to be honest about who she was. Now Emma comes to visit regularly. She started taking art classes too, photography like me. She says she's trying to figure out who she is when she's not trying to be perfect. She's 17 now, applying to colleges, and she wrote her admission essay about watching her mother choose authenticity over comfort. She sent it to Amanda before submitting it, and Amanda called me crying. She wrote that I taught her that it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be, Amanda told me. "Rebecca, our daughter, thinks I'm brave. After everything, after all the pain I caused her, she thinks I'm brave. Victoria is still married, still successful in real estate, but she's different now. Softer somehow. She talks about her feelings instead of just her deals. She brings her kids to the foundation events, wanting them to grow up understanding that success isn't just about money, that there are different ways to build a meaningful life. And me? I'm still taking photos, still trying to capture truth and beauty in the everyday moments that most people overlook. I've had a few relationships that didn't work out, mostly because I was afraid to let anyone get too close. That's something I'm working on. Learning that the walls my father built don't have to be my walls too. Learning that I can love and be loved without losing myself. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had gotten 50 million Reais instead of that chest. I probably would have traveled, bought better equipment, maybe opened my own gallery. I would have been comfortable, secure, free from the constant worry about making rent and affording new gear. But I don't think I would have become who I am now. The struggle, the uncertainty, the need to prove that my choice was valid, all of that shaped me. It taught me resilience. It taught me what I was capable of when I had to rely on myself. More importantly, I don't think I would have found my mother. Not the idealized version I had created in my mind, the perfect mother I barely remembered, but the real woman, the artist who had to sacrifice her dreams, the wife who loved a man who didn't fully understand her, the mother who looked at her youngest daughter and saw both hope and heartbreak. Finding her, really finding her through those letters and journals, gave me something no amount of money could buy. It gave me roots. It gave me context. It gave me permission to be imperfect and struggling and still worthy of love. Last month marked 5 years since my father's death. My sisters and I went to the cemetery together, something we now do every year. We brought flowers and we sat by the graves of both our parents for a while, not saying much, just being together. Before we left, I placed a print of one of my photographs on my mother's headstone. It was from my Mothers and Daughters series, a shot of a young woman teaching her daughter to use a camera, their heads bent together over the viewfinder, both of them smiling. I like to think she would have appreciated it. At my father's grave, Amanda left a sketch she had made. Victoria left a brochure from the Foundation's latest exhibition. We were giving them both what we had learned to give ourselves, the freedom to create, to choose, to become who we were meant to be. Driving home that day, I thought about inheritance and what we really receive from our parents. It's not just money or property or even DNA. It's the stories they tell us, the dreams they pass down, the wounds they couldn't heal, and the strengths they didn't know they had. My father gave me distance, but in that distance, I learned independence. He gave me the feeling of not being good enough, but in fighting against that feeling, I learned my own worth. And in the end, he gave me the key to understanding him, to understanding my mother, to understanding myself. The chest sits in my bedroom now, still holding my mother's letters and journals. I read them sometimes when I'm feeling lost or scared. I run my hands over the carved wood and remember the day I opened it, the day everything changed. The day I learned that sometimes the smallest inheritances are the most valuable, that sometimes being overlooked is actually being seen in a deeper way, that sometimes what looks like neglect is actually a father's clumsy attempt to give his daughter the thing she needs most, even if it takes decades for her to receive it. I won't pretend that everything is perfect now. I still struggle with money. I still have moments of doubt where I wonder if I made the right choices. I still feel the ghost of my father's disapproval sometimes, even though I know now where it really came from. But I also have clarity. I have purpose. I have a connection to my mother that goes beyond memory into real, tangible understanding. I have sisters who have become friends, allies, fellow travelers on the complicated journey of figuring out who we are separate from who we were told to be. And I have my work, the photographs I take, the moments I capture, the beauty I find in unexpected places. That's my real inheritance, not from my father, but from my mother. The ability to see, the courage to show what I see to the world. The understanding that art isn't a luxury or an indulgence, but a way of processing life, of making sense of the chaos, of leaving something behind that says, I was here, I saw this, I felt this, and I made something beautiful from it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not getting money like my sisters did. The question used to bother me, but now I just smile. How do you explain to someone that a locked chest full of old letters gave you more than millions of Reais ever could? How do you make someone understand that the greatest gift isn't financial security, but the truth about where you come from and who you're meant to be? I don't try to explain anymore. I just show them my work. The photographs of mothers and daughters, of light falling across ordinary scenes in extraordinary ways, of moments captured and preserved and offered up as proof that beauty matters, that seeing matters, that the impractical choice is sometimes the one that saves your life. This past year, I started working on a new project. I'm photographing the chest itself, creating a series that documents it from every angle, in different lights, capturing the way the carved patterns cast shadows, the way the old wood has weathered and aged. I'm pairing these images with excerpts from my mother's letters, creating a visual narrative about inheritance and legacy, and the things we pass down through generations. The process of photographing the chest has been meditative and emotional. I've spent hours studying the grain of the wood, the intricacy of the carvings, the way the iron lock has rusted. I've photographed it at dawn, at night, empty with lid open, and with her camera resting inside. Each photograph is paired with a passage from her journals. One image shows the chest's lock in close-up, paired with her words about feeling locked away. Another shows light streaming through the open lid, paired with her hope that I would open doors she couldn't. The series is almost complete now. I'm planning to show it next month at a gallery in Vila Madalena, not far from where I live. I've invited my sisters, of course. I've also invited Senor Cardoso, my father's lawyer, who I've stayed in touch with. He's become a kind of surrogate uncle, someone who knew both my parents and can fill in the gaps in my understanding of them. The last time I spoke with Senor Cardoso, he told me something that added another layer to my understanding. We were having coffee, and he got quiet before speaking. Your father came to see me about a year before he died, he said. He wanted to change his will. He said you needed something different than money. You needed to know the truth about your mother. Senor Cardoso paused, his eyes wet. He said he'd failed her by not understanding her passion. He couldn't fail you the same way. I cried then, understanding finally that my father's last gift to me was confession. I've been thinking about what to call the series. For a while, I considered something obvious like the chest or inheritance, but those titles didn't feel right. They were too literal, too focused on the object rather than what it represented. Then, reading through my mother's journals again last week, I found the perfect title. In one entry, she had written about the difference between wealth and richness. Wealth is about money, she wrote, but richness is about meaning. You can be wealthy and poor at the same time if your life has no meaning. And you can be financially poor but rich beyond measure if your life is filled with purpose and love and beauty. So that's what I'm calling it, Richness. The series, the photographs, the story of the chest, and what it contained, and what it gave me. Because that's what I received from my father's will. Not wealth, but richness. The richness of knowing my mother. The richness of understanding my father. The richness of finally, completely, accepting myself. My sisters have been incredibly supportive of the project. Victoria is helping me with the business side, making sure I'm pricing the prints correctly, handling the contracts with the gallery. Amanda has been reading through the series statement I wrote, helping me refine the language, make sure I'm saying what I really mean to say. It's a different kind of collaboration than I ever imagined having with them, but it feels right. It feels like we're all contributing our different strengths to something that matters to all of us. Last week, we had a practice run of the exhibition at my apartment. I'd hung prints on every wall, arranged them in the order they'd appear in the gallery. My sisters came over with wine and takeout, and we spent the evening walking through the series, reading the excerpts from Mom's journals, looking at the images of the chest from every angle. Victoria stopped in front of the final image, the one I'd taken just last month. It shows the chest with all three of our cameras inside, Mom's film camera, my digital camera, and Amanda's instant camera that she'd recently bought to document her painting process. The three cameras nestled together in the space where Mom's dreams had waited for me to find them. The journal excerpt paired with it reads, "My greatest wish is that my daughters will help each other see, that they will know they are connected by more than blood, but by vision, by the courage to look at the world and create something from what they find there. We're all in here," Victoria said softly, "in this chest, in this project, in everything you've created. You didn't just inherit Mom's dreams, Rebecca. You're helping all of us inherit them too." Amanda nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. I spent so many years thinking inheritance was about money and property. But this, she gestured at the photographs surrounding us, this is real inheritance. It's Mom giving you her vision, and you giving it back to us, and all of us passing it forward to the artists we support through the foundation. It's a gift that keeps growing instead of getting divided up and spent. The opening is in 2 weeks. I'm nervous in a way I haven't been about a show in years. This one feels more personal, more exposing. I'm not just showing my photographs. I'm showing my heart. I'm showing the journey from feeling like the disappointment daughter to understanding that I was actually the daughter my father trusted most with the truth. I'm showing the transformation that happened in that storage unit, in those hours of reading and crying and finally understanding. But I'm also excited. Excited to share my mother's words with the world. Excited to show that a chest that looked like an insult was actually the greatest gift I could have received. Excited to prove, once and for all, that I made the right choice when I picked up a camera and decided that capturing beauty was a worthy way to spend my life. Yesterday, I was in my studio, making final adjustments to the prints, when my phone rang. It was Amanda. She wanted to know if I remembered a specific story Dad used to tell about Mom. Something about her sneaking away to take photographs when she was supposed to be at some family event. I did remember, vaguely, but I had always assumed it was just a funny anecdote. Amanda said she had been thinking about it differently now. She wondered if that was Dad's way of showing us he had known about Mom's passion, that he had noticed even if he hadn't known what to do with that information. We talked for over an hour, the two of us trying to piece together our parents' relationship from fragments of memory and the letters in the chest. We realized that love, real love, is so much more complicated than we thought when we were young. It's not just about grand gestures or perfect understanding. Sometimes it's about trying and failing and trying again. Sometimes it's about giving what you can even when you know it's not enough. Sometimes it's about leaving a locked chest and hoping that someday, somehow, the person you loved will understand what you were trying to say. I think my father was trying to say that he saw me, really saw me. Even when I thought he was looking away, even when I felt invisible, he was watching. He was seeing me choose the hard path, the path that didn't make sense to him but that he recognized because his wife had wanted to walk it too. And in the end, he gave me what he couldn't give her: permission, support. the validation that came from preserving her dreams and passing them on to me. That's what I want people to understand when they see my exhibition. That inheritance isn't just about money. It's about the things we carry forward, the dreams we fulfill on behalf of the people who couldn't fulfill them for themselves. It's about understanding that love looks different in every family, in every relationship, and that sometimes the thing that hurts us most is actually the thing that shapes us into who we're meant to become. Tomorrow I'm going to spend the day at the gallery, helping with the installation. My sisters are both coming to help, even though neither of them knows much about hanging art. But they want to be there. They want to be part of this. We've come so far from that day in the lawyer's office when we sat in a row like strangers, each of us locked in our own understanding of what we deserved, what we had lost, what our father's choices meant about our worth. Now we understand that we all received exactly what we needed. Amanda needed money to give her the security to take risks later, to leave the perfect life and find a real one. Victoria needed money to prove to herself that she could succeed on the terms that had been set for her before she could rewrite those terms. And I needed the chest. I needed my mother's words and dreams. I needed the truth about my father's distance. I needed to know that the path I had chosen wasn't wrong, just different, just mine. As I sit here in my apartment, my mother's camera on the desk beside me, I feel overwhelmed with gratitude, not just for the chest and what it contained, but for the journey it sent me on, the journey of discovering who my mother really was, the journey of understanding my father, the journey of accepting myself, the journey of reconnecting with my sisters and building something new together. I pick up the camera and hold it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It's solid, well-made, built to last, just like the legacy my mother left me, just like the foundation my sisters and I are building, just like the life I've created by choosing to see the world my own way and having the courage to show others what I see. In 2 weeks, people will walk into that gallery and look at photographs of an old wooden chest. They'll read excerpts from letters written by a woman they never knew. They'll see images of light and shadow, of carved wood and aged paper, of a daughter's search for understanding. Some will get it, some won't. That's okay. The exhibition isn't for everyone. It's for the people who understand that sometimes the smallest things carry the most meaning, for the people who know what it's like to feel overlooked, for the people who are brave enough to choose the impractical path because it's the one that leads home. And it's for my mother, wherever she is. This is my way of saying thank you for the camera, for the letters, for the journals, for the dreams you passed down to me. Thank you for seeing me before I could see myself. Thank you for leaving me a map when you knew I would need it, even though you couldn't be here to help me read it. And it's for my father, too. Thank you for keeping the chest safe all those years, even when it must have hurt to know it existed. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, even though it revealed your own vulnerabilities. Thank you for loving me in the only way you knew how, and for giving me, in the end, what mattered most. The chest is empty now, except for the letters and journals and camera. But in a way, it's fuller than ever. It's filled with understanding, with forgiveness, with the knowledge that we are all doing our best with what we know, with what we've been given, with the wounds we carry and the dreams we couldn't quite reach. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a second chance through our children. A chance to give them what we couldn't have ourselves. A chance to say, through wood and paper and old cameras, I see you. I know you. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. That's my inheritance. That's what 50 million Reais could never buy. That's what I found when I opened a locked old chest and discovered that I had been rich all along.